Oh my goodness. I've said it before and I will say it again. That Haas though! Yes, I know it's a repeated joke of mine, but based on what Toyota's been up to with Haas, I might not be able to use it for much longer. If the reveal of the 2026 Haas is anything to go by, this team might be rewriting their role in F1 sooner than expected. While we all admired the renders and how white it looked, and laughed at the rendering glitch of having the rear tyres on the front, the real headline came from their technical director, Andrea De Zorto, and the timing? Very suspiciously aligned with the technical partnership announced from Japan back in 2024. Might this all suggest that Toyota is just as familiar with the brand new regulations as Haas are, and what it might signal in the years to come, that it might be really giving us all what we're thinking right now? Well, here are just some of Andrea's words for your consideration. Ahem. It actually started in the second half of 2024, when a small group looked at the concept of the new car, the 2026 one, and that group stayed until the VF25, last year's car, was launched. The allocation of resources from there shifted toward the 2026 program, and we made a full transition after the summer break of last season. So that means they were working on the 25 car, then they eased it off, then went on to the 26 car again. Because of the close championship competition, a small group of us were still working on the VF25 for quite a while, which was a big challenge for the management. Sure, Williams have made the early development cliché a thing, but Haas, doing what they're doing, the smallest team on the grid committing this early and having the capacity to do so, that very much smells like Toyota wanting to really get down and dirty with the new regulations and understand it throughout as their main technical partner. And maybe they're actually excited at the prospect. Compare that to Honda's Tokyo Motor Show presentation, where they introduced a new logo, an engine, then Aston Martin themselves, all packed with neutral expressions and pragmatic formality and prepared for the rigors of this year's new engine rules. I absolutely understand that Japanese corporate vibes call for absolute humility and pragmatism and understanding the challenges that are being partaken, but at the same time, when I was watching that presentation at 4 o'clock in the morning, it just felt a little bit off that nobody really wanted to be there, but there are suggestions that F1 Stefano Domenicali wanted this to actually happen to showcase Honda's return and to make it really clear that 26 is going to be big, which might also explain why Stefano popped up at Red Bull's event in Detroit. But even then, allowing for all of the norms, I wasn't getting the same intrigue and excitement and enthusiasm that I've been getting for the Toyota project ever since they announced their collaboration with Haas. Since that day, it's felt like these two parties have gotten together and going, oh yeah, it's going to be really cool, oh yeah. Because we got Komatsu and his buddies banding together to form a brand new band and make some very lovely music together. But I will admit, Honda's brand new logo, which is kind of like one of their old ones, like really old ones, is actually a really nice touch. I quite like it. And it was nice of them to include Aston Martin in all of this to show the seriousness of their partnership, now rolling this logo out internationally instead of just using it for EV concepts. But again, I've seen Toyota talking so much more enthusiastically about Formula One. Maybe it's been down to the fact that, well, Aston Martin's been talking big, whereas Haas have just been, trying to survive. The stakes are somewhat different, to be fair. And also, Toyota isn't currently stressed in trying to make an engine yet, whereas Honda are. The challenges in producing that are massive, understandably, with Ferrari doing all the legwork there for Haas as one of their customers, but the overall tone is something that exudes curiosity amongst us all. But Andrea's words do feel like more than a normal sponsor relationship with extra stickers. And trust me, there are quite a few big Toyota stickers on that car, and they do outnumber the likes of Haas. The words from him, though, are very straightforward. To me, what I've heard from De Zordo and everything else suggests to me that Toyota has either been providing them more personnel to help share the workload amongst different departments to allow key Haas personnel to do their job, or maybe Toyota getting their hands dirty and trying to understand the concept alongside their brand new team, which is why such a team of this smallness can actually do something which is more typical of the big team, which admittedly teams were not able to do properly in earnest until New Year's Day 2025. But even though there was an embargo, they could still theorize and talk about the rules, at least I think so. But regardless, this quote means that Haas protected a 2026 brain trust through the noisiest part of the year, and then, once they could really go in all guns blazing. And again, for a small team, this is a real serious act of self-control. Almost too serious. They must have had the assistance of Toyota Gazoo. They seriously must have been given a bunch of kazoos and just told to do their things. Over at Haas, the cacophony of because the Toyota partnership is them supplying the boring superpowers that many of the minnow teams usually lack. That being people, facilities, manufacturing stuff, having the means to undertake testing mileage, and the ability to train staff without setting their own budget cap allocation on fire where they themselves are stretched. Because there's been nothing short of one thing after another for Haas to make them actually look more like a conventional Formula One team. Not long ago, we were all screaming to the heavens to Gene, "Oh, for goodness sake, just sell this team to Andretti already and be done with it." Now, though, we're not saying that anymore. And I do point to that testing program because it is called the TGR Haas Driver Development Program, and that goes way beyond the typical title sponsor because why would they care about naming the TPC program after themselves? There's no money in it. And there are some rumours to suggest, so I'll get the foam out for this bit, that according to motorsport.it, that Toyota is willing to take some of the workload, in fact the majority of the workload, off of Haas's hands to run the TPC program, so that means they can then get on with working on 2026. So sharing the load and having that program at Toyota's own track. That kind of cooperation sounds really, really spicy. Thusly, we need to look back at the massive statement from a couple of weeks ago. Well, it was more like a confession about the brand's plan to split their motorsport identity back into Gazoo Racing and Toyota Racing. Their German base in Cologne becomes the R&D center for long-term development and engine work. Everyone hears Toyota and thinks Japan, but actually, Cologne has a lot of the gubbins that go into Toyota's modern racing heritage and infrastructure. The race even pointing out that Toyota, in a Haas context, really means the Cologne-based Toyota Racing entity, providing personnel support, as well as those two other conventional tools I just mentioned. They no longer have to rely, Haas, on Ferrari being the big daddy of that organisation. Toyota in this capacity could be better read as some sort of big brother figure, and really testing the waters about whether or not it's worth getting back into F1 again. And also, that wind tunnel of theirs, it's perfectly FIA certified, so Haas doesn't have to go through the rigmarole of building their own wind tunnel to escape the clutches of Ferrari's wind tunnel in Maranello, and they can just have a turnkey situation where they can just move into Germany and just carry on. And all of this means that for the first time, I think, in their entire history, according to their technical director, Haas had the room to breathe and actually think about two projects at the same time. All Toyota had to do was just make sure there was plenty of padding in regards to the mechanical capacity as well as the human capacity. And I think they certainly have the resources to do that, with Toyota being one of the biggest companies in the world, all the while behaving like a team within a budget cap era. And that in of itself is already quite a wholesome story, because the last couple of years has seen nothing but good signs and good shoots of development from Haas. We all want to see them succeed, we want to see them do well, and we're happy to actually see them look and present themselves normally. Although admittedly, the ghost of Dmitry Mazepin still loomed strong not that long ago. But yes, despite that feel-good story, it really does feel like Toyota's trying to understand what it will take to get back into F1 without calling it a works return. So that means they can really come in on song and not make any missteps like they did last time. But despite that though, the aura around Haas does feel different. It feels bigger. It feels more standard. And the release of the VF26 carries on that difference in feel, because it looks really quite developed. Similar to what happened in 2022, but unlike then, you feel like the continual progression and upgrade path will be a lot more standard and actually yield something of benefit. And also there's the possibility of several senior personnel within Toyota's facility and WEC program could have actually had a hand in this, since they used to be, in some part, former F1 engineers. So Haas may already be tapping into an engineering pool with direct experience of the sport that Toyota's trying to climb back into. And that does sound dramatic until you notice what Toyota's basically been telling us and what they've been up to, using their own language and statements and press releases. Gazoo could go back to doing what it was doing best, in innovating quickly and more streamlined, and not have to worry about the bloated long-term technical development that the mainline Toyota outfit, Toyota Racing, can then go on to do. So it's just a cyclical process throughout, whilst also keeping Gazoo true. There's a good possibility to suggest that this year's Haas is a training mule for Toyota, that this is the first car that they've actually had a hand in developing, because the VF25, when Toyota came along, was pretty much already good to go. The gap between 24 and 25 as we heard from many teams, considering this was heading toward the end of a regulation cycle, was minimal. Toyota, understanding and collaborating on the 26 project, makes a whole lick of sense. So this might start to have some of that company's DNA etched within the chassis that is dubbed the VF26. Or should I say, the TF26. And that reference does carry more weight, considering that the old Toyota F1 cars were dubbed TF, VF, TF. It's only 2 letters different in the alphabet. But all jokes aside, Haas may have actually given Toyota a living laboratory to try things out in case they want to come back to Formula One, now with a much bigger presence than there was just 18 months ago, when nobody's quite sure where this path and collaboration and cooperation scheme was actually going to go. They clearly like what they are seeing, and they want Formula One to be part of their crown jewel, much like how TWG wants to use Cadillac F1 alongside their Formula E Andretti operation, their IMSA operations and IndyCar, to really strike it hard internationally. Toyota's just doing the same, except this time far less bureaucratically. Granted, the limitations of Haas are still present, and their customer supply of Ferrari engines and gearboxes are things to take into account, but it's still early days. And if the Italian marque wishes to put more eggs in the Cadillac basket, or just their own, Toyota could learn a thing or two before that time, and maybe come in to step up. And yes, the team being called TGR Haas is a little weird, considering the same statement I've shared with you before talked about removing the T from Gazoo Racing and plumping for just using Toyota Racing. But as I mentioned in the previous video, and I will remind you now, this is a very steady process. As we have seen clearly, Toyota is not in the business of rushing things. They said that by the time we get to 2027, the transition from having just Toyota Gazoo Racing to having Gazoo and Toyota separately will be complete. So for the poor souls that have done all of the rebranding over at Haas's factory, you're going to have to work again, sorry. Okay, so let's deal with the specific question that I've tried to bring up to you. Is it reasonable to suggest, really truly reasonable, that Toyota and Haas have been this linked, closely linked, in developing the 26 car since they announced their technical partnership in the back end of 24? Yes, but with one important caveat. The caveat being that closely linked may not mean Toyota authored the aerodynamic concept or replaced Dallara in making the chassis or replacing Ferrari in terms of the engine. No, that would be too sudden and jarring and hasty, and much more like what they used to do back in the 2000s, when it was keen to be in a hurry, throw flurries of cash at problems, and believe that their own way was the right way and the only way, instead of actually properly understanding said issues. Because seriously, they believed that, oh, we have rally engineers, just put them in an F1 car environment, they can do the same thing, they'll be fine. No, they weren't fine. And the reality here is that Haas is still working around the conditions and limitations of Ferrari's IP. And there are certainly many grey clouds over Formula One regarding the efficacy and the potential of the Ferrari power unit. All of the headlines we have heard up until now has not exactly painted Ferrari in a very good picture. So it wouldn't surprise me if Ferrari drops the ball and Haas are limited in terms of engine power in a formula now where engine power is suddenly a big priority again instead of just ground effect. Then Haas may decide enough is enough. Even the Italian reporting from motorsport.it that I shared with you earlier frames Toyota advancing quietly around Italian machinery. But what you can say is that Toyota has been in the room where 26 chatter went on, perhaps maybe helping build the room and staffing parts of the room to help the room work as well as possible, given the short time frame before 2025 kicked on. But now we get to the spiciest part, the part where Toyota is perhaps running a stealth pre-works program. A program with human resources at the center of it all. You know the whole thing, I peddle it before, Toyota's been peddling recently, the whole people-product pipeline chestnut. The statement of intent that Akio Toyoda has been proclaiming for the last couple of years and has now recently said has begun to move on. Like that statement showed, oh, that was a big move. And it's all framed around giving young drivers, engineers, mechanics, what have you, the belief that they can then build themselves up into something great. That every single Toyota racing program can learn from one another and then ultimately produce something that is greater than the sum of its parts. Collaboration through top-tier engineering and motorsport, that is a really good strategy. And Toyota is just hurling themselves in and have proved to us for the last decade and a half, they really are in the business of understanding what sort of series they get themselves into and then ultimately succeeding at. And F1 is one of the biggest world stages going right now, which they are, as of now, not a major part of. They are increasing that presence, albeit silently, but we've caught on to that. You, clicking on this video, are aware of what's going on with these shenanigans, so do watch closely the language we hear from that team in the coming months. And as we have seen, Akio Toyoda, the current president of Toyota, really loves his motorsport. He was part of the origins of Gazoo Racing itself, with that Nürburgring anecdote they shared in their own statement, and how renegade and rogue they were against corporate house, which were really suffering the sour taste of Formula One and sinking hundreds of millions of dollars right before an economic and financial crisis. Akio knows his wheel. Wheel is his passion, so it's totally understandable that he'll eventually want to add F1 back into Toyota's international portfolio. Come on! And again, it gets even spicier when you go back to that ItalianMotorsport.com article, because not only does it bring up rumours that Toyota might be taking on responsibilities for the Haas TPC program, it also suggests that perhaps more money might be headed toward that F1 initiative. That it may divert about a third of their current World Rally Championship budget toward Formula One. Now, I must point out that this news is not confirmed, but it would still fit the ongoing pattern we've seen coming from this collaboration perfectly. The testing of previous cars is a process. It's not a glamorous pursuit or anything. The staff there work long hours for no external attention. It's all about training new people, as well as refining operations. And then we have to zoom out again as to what's going on with the wider world of F1, because this year is the season of manufacturers. Once again, just like in the 2000s. We've got Audi coming in on song, General Motors with Cadillac. We've got Honda returning for the billionth time. Sure, Cadillac is getting a little bit of assistance in that regard from Ferrari initially, before then striking it out alone come 2029. But that Cadillac chestnut does emphasize and validate what Toyota's trying to do in having a works-ish operation with customer engine support. And there could always be a scenario in the not-too-distant future that General Motors may decide it's not worth pursuing a power unit, or Ferrari decides to make it worth their while in remaining with them as their lead customer. Because Ferrari having General Motors as a close ally, that could be very useful on a political level. And Ferrari really does love its politics, as you have seen very clearly in the last few months. And Toyota not having a piece of it and deciding to keep themselves at arm's length and just being technical partners with Haas, that doesn't sound right, not at all. Especially with Honda coming back in, General Motors coming back in, Toyota having some sort of beef with both of them in different markets. It's so obvious now. And Cadillac doing this just makes the whole Toyota Haas thing sound less weird and sound like a standard onboarding path. But so far, there is no grand entrance at play, just a title partnership, a driver development program, a simulator build, staff growth, a European tech center renamed to Toyota Racing with an explicit engine development mission. But that actually sounds like a lot, considering that back when we heard this announcement, we just thought, oh, they're just going to provide some extra tools. No, it's gotten a lot bigger since then. And then to top it all off, you may have actually had a few Toyota bods working with Haas closely from day one and understanding the new regulations. That is a very close technical partnership if you ask me. But it does bring back up the love triangle angle again, between Ferrari, Haas, Toyota, and how long that relationship can last until Ferrari just goes, Mamma Mia! And accuses Haas of doing something nefarious, because Ferrari is not afraid of shoving its own weight around in Formula One, is it? I can't imagine Ferrari being thrilled with the idea of Toyota having its ear that close to the ground and maybe influencing the development of the 2026 car around its own bits and bobs at the rear. Because yes, Haas is still tied to them for core hardware, the engine, the gearbox, and even has a facility at Maranello. And Ferrari, I think, wants customers that stay predictable and contained, whilst Toyota wants to learn about the current state of F1, as well as maybe the process of penetrating themselves back into it. Haas also maybe wanting their own goal, in wanting to be a real team without paying the full build everything yourself bill. That may create a weird situation where Haas engineers are living between Ferrari components and Toyota methodology. Toyota can easily learn a thing or two just by being there, understanding what Haas gets up to with Ferrari in terms of processes and what have you, as well as habits and overall culture. Those are the things you can easily learn by just working the daily jobs day in, day out, as well as driver feedback loops and then engineering feedback loops, as well as aerodynamic feedback loops, because Ferrari does supply parts, but they do also influence how a car is actually built, in the case of Haas especially, at the rear, which is why you're getting so many people poring over those images of the Haas and trying to gain some clues as to what Ferrari's going to cook up with when they announce their car on Friday. That's the kind of stuff Toyota can safely and legally absorb until a point where Ferrari starts to get very uncomfortable with this arrangement and demand some restrictions, if there aren't any already. And I think what may help to spur on this situation is that they look over to Cadillac Ferrari and think that, well, that relationship is so much more straightforward, we can use them as a testbed. And it also helps that Ferrari came to Cadillac's rescue in giving them an engine deal, what with their connections to Mario Andretti, because we weren't entirely sure who was actually going to supply them. So that kind of reliance in providing the genesis for Cadillac, it's the sort of thing that they used to have with Haas. But yes, let's not get hasty here, folks. Many of us recall the memories of 2002 through 2009 and the cost of bureaucracy, which I recall going as far as head office insisting that the team moves back to Bridgestone rubber in 2006 because of the Japanese connection, despite the fact that Bridgestone were in Ferrari's pocket and the other teams that were on that rubber were left largely neglected. But Toyota's whole posture right now is the complete opposite of bureaucracy, wishing to fully integrate themselves into every single series they race in, instead of just barging in thinking they can do things the same in every single sport. So all of that makes the Disordo quote read so much more differently. The big challenge for the management line in particular, perhaps one of the big challenges, was deciding what Haas becomes as well as the fundamental designs of a 2026 car. And Haas being able to do this kind of maneuver right now suggests that recent depth has been added thanks to an outside force, a really big force. So yes, I think it's perfectly reasonable to suggest that there have been some people within the Toyota circles helping out Haas in building the concepts of the 26 car back in the second half of 2024, right at the beginning, because just lending a few ears is an easy administrative addition right at the beginning of a contract or a deal. And that the steady increase in representation and cooperation signals that these two parties really like working together and they love the ultimate goal in maybe building a team that can easily go up against the big names, the legacy names, correcting the mistakes of the last Toyota venture. And all of this happening right at the beginning of the team trying to understand what these new regulations will entail, which then makes me think the VF26 is a Toyota Haas hybrid, the first one. Because if they can continually develop this car at a fairly decent pace and not run out of money or resources or wherewithal, then it will just show that Toyota has really helped them out considerably. And everything since that initial announcement has pointed to Toyota embedding capabilities that make Haas behave like a bigger organization, because it all harks back to their origin story of their 21st century motorsporting story, starting with Ayao himself saying that his party could not be called Toyota because it wasn't allowed. But then they built a skunk works, which then became a culture. Now they're splitting that culture from the corporate tech arm, all while running a title partnership that almost looks misbranded by design. History repeating. For sure, it'll be sad to see the Haas brand maybe slowly fade into nothing more than perhaps a sponsorship deal of a new Toyota F1 team in the years to come. But if Gene should be credited for anything, it's allowing himself and his team principal to explore a venture with such a great force and pull something off which has really captivated us all. It should generate a huge amount of acclaim. Because what Gene has done here in allowing Ayao Komatsu and Toyota to explore something really quite defined is ensuring that his team will lug on a fair bit longer than it might have done had he just kept everything closed and internal and him the only person in charge running the show. Because you've got to remember, he's not getting any younger, and he'll want a smooth transition out of Formula One without it looking like he's just sold things up and gone home. No, if he's passing the torch symbolically over to a huge mega corporation whilst keeping the effective Haas operation the same but with a different name, mission complete. And that if Toyota ever does decide to return, the signal and the pomp and circumstance will be very minimal. It'll be just like, yeah, it took you long enough, didn't it? And the experience that they've gained has been done behind closed doors, save from some occasional peeps. But now I think the door has been left slightly ajar. That means we can start to hear some essences of what's been going on, and then maybe we'll start to see that door open that little bit more. And I think one of the first examples of all of that is that we see the GR logo everywhere, dominating the Haas logo, and you might be thinking, well, that's just the typical thing of a title sponsor. Well, I do see the Haas influence being that little bit smaller, because who also shares white and red and black? Toyota. And what you can crack into is this video right here, which I know you will enjoy. I'll see you over there.